So today there's basically going to be four major topics that we're going to want to cover today. And Emily, if I can just get you to advance the slide, please. Yes, thank you. So the four major topics that we're looking to cover today are going to be first, multi-factor authentication, what it is and how it can benefit you. Second, how to back up your data. Many of you may already be backing up your data, but there's some additional considerations we want to make sure that you're thinking about. Third, how to protect yourself against ransomware, and also to clarify what ransomware even is. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about email and branding. While not directly security related, it is very much security adjacent. So first things up, multi-factor authentication. This is a phrase that you may have heard thrown around before, but you may not be quite familiar with what it is. And I think it's very helpful to take a step back and understand the problem that it's trying to solve. When you try to log into any of your systems, your computers at work, for example, you have to prove that you're who you say you are with your identity. How do you do that? Well, traditionally, you provide a username and a password. And this has worked fine for years, decades even, but in recent years, it's become increasingly possible for bad guys to obtain your password. Well, what does that mean? Well, once they have your username and your password, they can effectively become you. They can read your emails, they can send emails as you, they can go through your files, they can do everything that you can do. So the good guys have been trying to come up with a way of helping to prove when you log into a system that you really are you and not someone pretending to be you. And the solution the industry at large has come up with is this thing called multi-factor authentication. And the idea is simple enough. It's that in addition to a password that you already type in, you would also need a second factor or a second thing to basically be able to prove you who you are. Typically, this would come in the form of a smartphone, and basically you'll get a prompt on your phone that asks you to authenticate the request. So the process here is fairly intuitive. If you're logged in at your computer and you are trying to log in, then you simply press the button to say, I approve this login, and everything works. So it's quite seamless in that sense. However, the real magic shines is then if you happen to be watching a movie one night and all of a sudden your phone buzzes asking you to log in, well, clearly you know that's not you. So you would want to press the cancel or deny button there, at which point you have now prevented the attacker from getting in, even though they've already obtained your password. So multi-factor authentication is very important. And let's talk about that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So what we have here is basically an example of how this can work. So multi-factor authentication can be enabled on many different kinds of services. This includes beyond just your transportation infrastructure services, but also in this example here, we have banking services. So you can see here, this particular user is trying to transfer some money, and then they're prompted on their phone with an option to either approve or cancel the transfer. If they know it's them, then they can press accept. You also have the option here for doing biometric verification with either Face ID or fingerprints. But again, if it's not you, it's as simple as hitting cancel. The reason I like this slide is it enforces how simple MFA can be. I know that there does tend to be a reputation out there for people that haven't had a lot of experience with it, that it can really interrupt their workflows. And really, it's not that bad. And the benefits that it provides are substantial. So the one thing that I would also say here is that it's important that you keep your device with you at all times, because of course that will be one limitation. If you don't have your device with you, then you wouldn't be able to authenticate. So to give you kind of an idea of the scope of the benefit of MFA, Microsoft Services, they have their own security team, and they released a study in 2020 where they looked at all of the potential attacks against their systems, and they found that over 99% of the common attacks they see have been or would have been stopped if the users were using multi-factor authentication. So this is something that we highly recommend that you enable for all of your services everywhere you can. And I would recommend that this extends even beyond just your core transportation infrastructure, but also for any personal services, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., because those services can often act as a launch pad to be able to gain access to other services. So the moral of the story is enable MFA everywhere you absolutely can. And with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Justin, who's going to talk to us about backups.
We actually have a question here, guys.
Oh, absolutely.
What can somebody use for MFA if they don't have a cell phone?
Oh, that is an excellent question. So yes, absolutely, cell phones are by far the most common scenario because most people have them. But if you do have a situation where users don't want to use their cell phones, don't have one, or more commonly, you're in a high security environment where cell phones are not authorized, there are what are called basically security tokens. They're little keychain tokens that are very tiny that basically serve the same purpose. They'll show a little 6-digit code on them, and then you can type those codes in as your second factor of authentication.
Thank you so much, guys.
Absolutely. Okay, Justin, take it away.
All right, thanks, Robert. And thanks everybody for joining us this morning. The next topic that we're going to talk about today is backing up your data. So to get into what we're going to talk about here, we're going to talk about obviously backing up your data, but even more important, making sure you have the ability to restore that data when you need it. That is a critical point when it comes to the topic of digital security overall. We're also going to talk about cloud services, what is and isn't getting backed up, and some common misconceptions and interesting points. We're going to talk about why it's crucial to offload your data to a third party, especially when talking about cloud services. And then finally, a little bit about retention options that are available to you when you're using these cloud backup tools. So let's jump right into it. Microsoft and many other cloud providers actually don't back up your data automatically. Often there are redundancy or replication options, but it's really important to note that that's not a backup. Now, some cloud services may have specific backup options, but they either need to be configured, they may have limited features. At the end of the day, it's something that needs review and constant management, and it's really shouldn't be called automatic. Now, unfortunately, if your data is compromised, either from a failure, this can be from anything from a natural disaster, a technical glitch, bad actors, really any number of things. If you don't have a backup and recovery plan in place, there's a good chance you're going to find your data unrecoverable. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid by talking about this today. And you know what, guys? It's something that I wish didn't happen. I wish I could say that people didn't come to us because they lost important data. But the reality is it really is something that needs to be considered and planned for. So you might be asking, what can I do? That brings me to my next slide. As we've discussed, backups and the ability to recover your data is absolutely essential. It doesn't matter the platform, it doesn't matter the technology, but because we're talking about cloud-hosted services today, it's especially important for cloud-hosted services to have a plan in place. A phrase that I learned from Robert actually is that when it comes to recovering your data, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and you need to be prepared. So with cloud services, if your data just up and disappears one day, you really don't have a lot of recourse. Like, good luck trying to contact Amazon or contact Google or Microsoft about their cloud services if something's missing one day. It's just not they're not going to provide that customer support when you need it. So fortunately, there are third-party services which provide fully featured products that provide great protection that will back up your data. One feature I'd like to mention is, for example, let's say you have some data in the Microsoft Cloud. You can actually back up that data to Amazon, for example, or on-premise. But the important point there is that this tool lets you pull your data out of that ecosystem so you are in control of it. All of these products and many of these features, they require proper planning and design, but it is important to have a data recovery plan in place to ensure you are protected. Now, there is another advantage of third-party cloud backup tools that I would like to discuss, and that is the ability to have a longer retention for your backups. For example, if you have Microsoft Online email, if you delete something, your administrator can actually restore that for up to 30 days. Whether it's accidental, malicious, in a lot of cases that email is recoverable. However, if you don't realize something's deleted for 31 days, then it's gone and really gone. So luckily, the services that we work with and recommend, they do have what's called unlimited retention. And that means that if you start backing up with that service today, even 5 years from now, if you're like, oh, I need to look back and see what this folder looked like, I remember it being there last year, but it's not there now. You have the ability to go through those daily snapshots and find what you're looking for. So as you can see, there's a lot of advantages. I'm not covering all of them today, but it is a really important aspect, as I keep saying, and it is important to ensure you're able to recover your data when you need it. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone back over to Robert, and he's going to take us into our next topic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Justin. So our next topic here is a very scary one that I'm hoping you haven't had a chance to experience yet, and that is something called ransomware. So first, if you aren't familiar, let's just start with a quick definition. Ransomware is basically any software that finds its way into your computer networks, and once there, will use military-grade encryption to encrypt every single file it can get its hands on. It will then send the decryption keys off to the attackers, such that they are the only people on the planet that can decrypt the data, and then they will basically extort and demand money from you in the form of cryptocurrencies, typically. So these are a very, very scary issue in the modern world, and it's ones that we have to be extra vigilant for learning how to protect ourselves against. So let's give a little scope here for understanding kind of how big a deal ransomware has become in the last couple of years. SonicWall, one of the larger IT services vendors, they released a report where they noted over 500 million ransomware attack attempts just on the infrastructure that they're covering in basically the month of September alone. Because basically these attacks are in many cases are largely automated and are basically just scouring the internet looking for potential victims to hit. So the unfortunate takeaway here, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but the unfortunate reality is as Justin mentioned earlier, ransomware is one of those things now where it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. So what can we do then? We have to make sure that we have as many protections in place as possible to protect against this threat. So let's go into that now in a little more detail. So at DMS iTech, we like to see this as basically having 3 factors or 3 pillars of security to protect against this kind of thing, and each one acts as a layer against the one before it. So at that first layer, we have our software detection tools. This will be things like antivirus that runs on your endpoints and on your servers. This can be things like next generation firewall protection running on your perimeter. It can also be anti-spam and anti-malware appliances that are running on your email servers. The idea here is that all of these are going to be able to catch and detect most of any kind of ransomware attacks that may try to get into your system. But the reality is that with that many attacks happening, even if only 0.1% get through, something will get through. So that brings us then to our second layer of defense, which is user training. The reality is that for any ransomware to actually get into the system, the last step that has to happen is somebody in your organization has to click on something they're not supposed to, which is what triggers the event. Now, this doesn't mean those particular users are dumb or anything like that. The bad guys have gotten very good at social engineering and tricking people into doing things they otherwise wouldn't do. So this is why it's incredibly important to provide regular training for your staff on how to identify and respond to malicious emails. So with that, at DMS iTech, for example, we do also offer services where we can actually send what look like malicious emails to every user in your company. And if they click on any of them, rather than having anything bad happen, it will actually report back to say which users clicked on the links so that we know which users need additional training. And from there, we also offer a full suite of certification programs and training that we can provide to staff. So it's something that basically acts as the second layer of defense, right? Something makes it through, but the user's smart enough not to click on it, everything is fine. But 0.1% of those are invariably going to get through. So that leaves us with our last line of defense, and that is your backups. Now, backups have been a thing basically since the beginning of IT, but ransomware has changed the game on that a little bit, where it no longer is it enough to just have backups, because the ransomware authors, they know that if you have backups, you're just going to restore those and then you don't have to give them any money. So what the ransomware will do is it will actively seek out the backups on your network and delete them outright, meaning you can't restore from them. So how do you prevent against that? Well, there's really two things you need to do. First, you have to make essentially sure that you have what are called air-gapped backups or off-site backups. These are basically one-way written backups that nobody can change, not an administrator, not a malicious, not anybody. So basically, once they're written to, they're golden and locked in. The second thing you want to make sure that you have is multiple retention points. This is really important because the ransomware authors have realized that if you have your backups, you're just going to restore from them. So what they will do is they will actually have the ransomware sit dormant for some period of time so that they know that they will make it into the backups. So that way, when you restore them, the ransomware just comes back again. So that's why it's very important. You want to make sure you have retention points that go back however many days you're comfortable with, to basically give you that extra level of protection. And I think with that, I'd like to turn it back over now to Justin, who's going to talk to us now about email security.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So as we all know, email is a pretty integral part of communication today, and it's relied on heavily, especially in business applications. What you may not know is that email is actually 50 years old, and it was 50 years ago, they weren't designing the protocol really with security in mind, and not a lot has changed on the core functionality of email in that regard. So unfortunately, email spam is something we're all familiar with, and it is a major gateway to things like malware and ransomware, which Robert just talked about. Now, thankfully, there are many solutions out there that that are able to address that email spam. And I'd like to mention there's some free bolt-on features that they go by some strange names, but it's called SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and the names at the end of the day don't really matter. What they do is when implemented properly, they allow spam filters to verify that the email that you're sending is actually coming from your organization. So as you can imagine, that is very useful, and will help. It will result in your emails getting through to where they need to go with less problems. So if you have any questions about that, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to take a look at what you have now, advise on what you could change, and even help you do that if you're interested. So, but in addition, there's also spam filters, and those filters will go through every incoming email and look at it and say, this doesn't match up quite right, or this is using some interesting language that may not be legitimate. So actually, what happens is then it catches that and it marks it as spam, and it allows you as an administrator or your users to go through those and go, yeah, I don't want to look at this, I don't want to look at that. So definitely a couple of helpful systems to determine if emails are legitimate, and they are unique in the way that they're set up. So if you're having any trouble with spam, or even if you just wish to talk to somebody about what your options are, what you could do to better protect yourself, we would be happy to discuss that with you, and definitely reach out if you're interested. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about today is signature management. And like Robert said, it is security adjacent, and it's not it's not directly related to security, but it is adjacent, and it is important for your overall branding. So I'm going to throw out an example. Let's say somebody emails you, and with some information, and you need to give them a quick phone call. You need to visit their website to contact them, and they don't have any email signature. This can lead, anything from you having to start some searching, looking through past emails if they sent you their phone number previously. But at the end of the day, it can be a little bit frustrating if you just need to quickly get something done. If you flip that around, that's exactly what you want to avoid. You don't want your customers to ever become frustrated when they're contacting you or trying to get in touch with you, right? So the best way to solve that is having an email signature. We actually partner with and work with some awesome products that make managing signatures across your entire organization for all of your users really simple and painless. These tools, they allow a uniform signature with exactly the information that you want to share across all of your platforms, devices, users. It doesn't matter if they're using Outlook, they use webmail, if they're replying to emails on their phone like so many people do. It's going to be consistent all the time. And most importantly, it's going to provide your customers with what they want to see when they want to see it. All right, Robert, I'm going to pass this back over to you to take us over the finish line.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Justin. So we've covered a lot of high-level topics today, but we wanted to make sure we left you with something concrete and as a takeaway. So if you are managing IT for your organization yourself, we want to make sure that you have the questions to ask and make sure you have answers for. Alternatively, if you have someone managing IT for you, we want to make sure you have a series of questions that you can approach them for to make sure they have answers. So let's have a look now at that 7 checklists from the title. So the first one is, do you have multi-factor authentication enabled on all of the services where it's supported? 2, do you have not just backups, but air-gapped offsite backups with multiple retention points for any and all business critical data? 3, have you deployed antivirus and anti-malware solutions to all of your endpoints and servers? 4, are you happy with your current anti-spam solution in terms of its effectiveness? 5, do your users receive regular security training on how to spot and identify malicious emails? 6, has your email organization enabled those technologies Justin mentioned, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC? Remember, they're free to do. And finally, do you have a centralized signature management solution in place to centrally organize all of your signatures? So with that, that does conclude today's webinar. But before we go, we do want to leave you with one more thing. If you ever find yourself needing to send information over email securely, most typically passwords, I'm sure you know that sending the passwords in plain text is a terrible idea. Why? Because those passwords are going to sit in both the sender and recipient's emails, potentially forever. So what can you do? Well, DMS iTech has a solution, and it's on the screen right now. We offer a free service called ISafeSend.com. It's basically a website that you can go to that you can use to send secure information. How does it work? It's quite simple. You'll get the dialog box you see on your screen right there. The idea is that you would type in the password that you want to send securely. But crucially, you do not include the URL or the username that password corresponds to. That way, if somebody were to see it, it has no meaning unto itself. You then press the generate link button, and what that will do is that will create a one-time use website link. You can then send that link over email to the recipient along with the username and other details they may need to use it. Then on the recipient end, when they click on it, they will be able to see the content. But what's wonderful about that is that as soon as the link is viewed once, it is deleted forever. So if the recipient were to click on the link and it said this link has already been viewed, now you know that potentially there was a compromise and you should reset the password immediately. So it is a wonderful tool for sending secure information, and we highly recommend using it. And again, it's free. So I'd like to now turn it over to Emily to close us out. Thank you very much, everyone.